The learner, you're here because, well, you want to really get things right, to cut through the noise, understand complex stuff quickly, but without feeling totally overwhelmed.
And that's exactly what we try to do.
So today, we're diving into something pretty mind-bending, a big what if that really makes you look at the world differently.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thought experiment.
We're exploring what might happen based on this question from Associate Professor Dr. Afizavad Sirivadhanawarav-Char's work, What If English Disappeared Tomorrow? Imagine just waking up and English as that global connector gone.
It sounds like science fiction, almost. But thinking about its absence, as Dr. Sirivadhanawarav-Char suggests, is actually a really powerful way to see how much English, well, shapes things now, often in ways we don't even notice.
Right, so this isn't about predicting the future exactly.
No, not crystal ball gazing. It's about understanding the present role of English by imagining it's not there. We'll look at the ripples business, science, culture, even how we see ourselves.
Okay, let's unpack that. To really get our heads around losing it, we first need a clear picture of how dominant English actually is right now. It's more than just a language on the world stage, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Its dominance is, historically speaking, incredibly recent and fast. Think about it. 400 years ago, it was mostly just spoken on the British Isles.
Just 400 years.
Yeah. Now, it's an official language in, what, over 50 countries? That's at least 1.5 billion people right there. The speed of that rise is, well, it's pretty unique.
And that 1.5 billion, that's just where it's official, or the main language.
Exactly. On top of that, you've got at least 2 billion more people speaking it as a second language.
Yeah.
And crucially, that includes a lot of the global elite, people in positions of influence.
So it's the language of, well, almost everything international.
Pretty much. International relations, global business, science, diplomacy, aviation, shipping, pop culture, obviously.
It's hard to even imagine the world working without it. But the source material does mention this dominance isn't universally popular.
That's true, and it's important context.
Right.
While it's undeniably useful for connecting people, the source does note criticisms. Some view its spread as, quote, structurally predatory and socially malignant.
Strong words.
They are. There are complex histories and power dynamics tied up in its spread. But for today, we're focusing less on judging its current status and more on the what happens if it disappears.
Understood. So, okay, English as this global glue. What happens to global business if that glue dissolves? Feels like total chaos.
Profound disruption is probably the right way to put it. Think about international trade, finance. It all heavily relies on English right now.
If countries like the U.S., the U.K., they'd suddenly be struggling.
They face a huge challenge, yeah. Suddenly needing to train up massive numbers of people to be fluent in whatever new languages become dominant for business. That lag could put them at a serious competitive disadvantage.
And the flip side, who might actually benefit from this? The source hints at potential winners.
Well, it suggests countries like China, India, maybe Germany could gain an edge. There's an interesting example given, China setting up cloud computing hubs in Indonesia, training locals in their software ecosystem.
Ah, okay. So if the main language shifts.
Exactly. If, say, Indonesian became the key language for digital infrastructure in that region, Chinese tech firms might be much better positioned. It could really shift control over data, potentially weakening U.S. digital influence. It's a reminder that language shifts can redraw the geopolitical map, especially around new tech.
That's a layer I hadn't really thought about, the strategic tech angle. What about just day-to-day corporate stuff? Internal emails, marketing?
All of that gets incredibly complicated. Internal comms, external comms with customers, suppliers. It all changes. And think about branding.
Oh, yeah. Slogans, ads.
Exactly. So much depends on cultural nuance baked into the language. Trademarks, visuals, everything needs reevaluation. The source even speculates we might need like new mathematical tools just to describe how complex this multilingual communication would become.
So it's not just swapping words. The whole communication infrastructure changes. And could a new global business language pop up quickly?
It's possible. The source suggests it could happen faster than we might think, driven by tech, pricing, new business models, existing social networks.
Like how Latin or Greek became trade languages.
Precisely. A new commercial lingua franca could emerge. And whoever champions that language, they wouldn't just tap into new markets, they could gain enormous political power, too.
Okay, shifting gears. Science and research. English seems completely dominant there, too. How did that happen?
Yeah, the source points to the late 1950s. There was significant public investment then, which really helped establish English as the language for a scientific publication globally.
And that includes patents, standards, teaching material.
All of it. Patents, standards, how things are taught, where the funding goes. It created this whole English-centric ecosystem.
So if English vanished, what happens to all the science already published in English? Is it just a loss?
In practical terms, a lot of it could become, as the source puts it, like meaningless equity scrap papers. Instantly inaccessible almost.
Wow.
Think about a complex field, like the example given of predicting aircraft noise using simulations. Years, maybe decades, of incredibly detailed research, translating and reconverting all that. It would be a monumental task. Centuries, maybe, for some fields.
So the dependence is huge.
Absolutely. Losing English would be a massive setback for scientific progress itself.
And what about doing science? Publishing new findings, collaborating internationally?
Well, right now, publishing in English gets you the widest audience, more citations. Researchers in non-English-speaking countries already face barriers.
Which would get way worse.
Exactly. The entire scientific enterprise might need reinventing. New languages, maybe merging existing ones, new ways to share knowledge. And many current researchers, trained primarily in English, might struggle to even participate in building that new system.
And just accessing existing knowledge becomes a huge issue.
A fundamental one. Most academic work is only in English now. The source calls this epistemic injustice, unfairly locking people out of knowledge.
So Anglophones, who have it easy now,
would suddenly be in what the source colorfully calls a biogeographic, socio-historical linguistic black box, cut off from knowledge rooted in other languages and cultures. The social disruption from losing that access could be intense.
Okay, let's make it more concrete. Travel and tourism, what happens there?
The impact there feels pretty immediate, right? People would still travel, of course, but so many standard procedures just wouldn't work anymore.
Signs, booking systems, safety info.
All of it. Many places would become much harder to navigate. And while you might think, oh, translation apps, well, not everyone has them or can use them effectively, especially in the moment.
Yeah, just simple things like reading a menu, asking for directions. Suddenly a huge barrier.
Exactly. Planning trips using maps, basic interactions become way harder. The source contrasts this with parts of Eurasia now, where knowing a few words of, say, Urdu or Bengali, or recognizing some Chinese characters can actually get you quite far.
And cultural exchange. English helps that flow now.
It does. That would be hampered too. Non-English-speaking artists or cultural figures might find their global reach shrinking considerably.
Moving to diplomacy, that's already complicated enough.
Incredibly complex. Multiple countries, different negotiation styles. English often acts as that common ground, a working language.
So losing it adds another layer of difficulty.
Potentially, yes. Different cultures approach negotiation differently. Some like tackling issues one by one. Others want the whole picture first. Trying to convey those nuances through multiple translations could easily lead to more misunderstandings, more deadlock.
And there's a link between English spreading and the influence of, say, the US and UK.
Yeah.
Would that power balance shift?
It seems highly likely. The source notes that historical link. If English fades as the main language of global discussion, those power dynamics could definitely change. How exactly is hard to say, but change seems probable.
The source mentions a universal language maybe being needed for global threats, climate change, things like that.
Yeah, it touches on that idea that the potential benefit of a truly universal language for tackling shared problems. But it also acknowledges that's probably a bit utopian, realistically.
So if English fades, what takes its place? Is it just one new dominant language or something else?
The most likely scenario, according to the source, isn't necessarily a complete replacement, but a move towards more multilingualism.
Okay, so not a total wipeout for English, maybe.
Possibly not. You might see English remain important in certain areas for certain groups, but other languages rising in specific regions or fields may be linked to economic growth. English itself might become more domain-specific.
Are there obvious contenders to become the global language?
Well, languages like Chinese, Spanish, Hindi, Urdu get mentioned because they have vast numbers of speakers. But, the source points out, they currently have limitations as global lingua francas, often spoken in more monolingual areas, fewer people using them at a high level outside those areas compared to English second language speakers.
Interesting. And English itself has already changed a lot, right? Globally?
Hugely. Global English isn't just British or American English anymore. It's influenced by all sorts of accents, local variations, creoles. It's already adapting. We might also see regional languages become more important locally for intra-regional communication.
Okay, the elephant in the room, technology, AI translation, doesn't that just solve everything?
It's a massive factor, for sure. AI translation is getting incredibly good. Real-time translation of text, audio, video, potentially even images.
So maybe learning English becomes less critical.
That's the potential implication, yeah.
Yeah.
We might shift more towards written communication, too, making digital literacy even more vital. Imagine just speaking and having it come out instantly in another language with the right tone.
Seems amazing. But do we lose something? Humor? Subtlety?
That's the concern the source raises. Nuance, humor, satire. They're often deeply tied to cultural context. Can AI really capture all of that perfectly instantly? Maybe not always.
And what about future tech? VR, AR.
Right. The source speculates that in more visual communication environments drawing, gestures in VR spoken language might become less central overall, though AI could still play a role in helping us understand the reasoning behind those visual communications.
Language is so tied up with culture, identity. What happens there if English disappears as this global connector?
That's a really deep point the source makes. English isn't just words. It's a way of speaking, thinking, relating. Direct communication gives you more than just information. Facial expressions, tone, shared understanding.
So there's a fear of losing
Right.
identity, heritage.
Exactly. For people who use English to connect globally, or even primarily, losing it could feel like losing part of their identity, their voice, their way of seeing the world.
And the worry that a dominant language pushes out local ones.
Precisely. Language and identity are so closely linked. The spread of any lingua franca can create tension with preserving local languages, which are crucial repositories of culture, knowledge, unique ways of solving problems.
And tech isn't neutral here either.
No. Currently, only a tiny fraction of the world's languages are really used in our tech systems. That puts thousands of languages at even greater risk.
The source brings in different expert views. What do linguists or business leaders say about this hypothetical?
Linguist David Crystal talks about potentially seeing English speakers decline outside second language areas and maybe more pidgin languages emerging. Business leaders worry about communication fragmenting even within countries and global business shrinking. There's no common language for accessing information easily. Getting precise meaning across is key.
And anthropologists.
Richard Hudson emphasizes how much deep local understanding is embedded in language. Losing English as a global bridge could mean losing that direct cultural exchange we get through media.
So putting it all together, what are the big speculative scenarios? Is English really likely to just vanish?
Complete vanishing seems less likely than change, profound change. The source suggests English might fragment into different Englishes, like Latin evolved into French, Spanish, Italian.
So adapting locally.
Yeah, hybridization, adapting to local needs that's already happening. Near term, predicting big shocks is hard, but more plurilingualism, maybe the world dividing into language blocks, seems plausible.
And long term?
Long term, the kind of dominance English has now probably isn't sustainable forever. Social changes, resistance, again, the comparison to Latin's decline comes up. And as global power shifts, we might see different ideas of what modernity even means emerge.
Are there lessons from history when other major languages declined?
Definitely. The source mentions the decline of Latin, Greek, Arabic as languages of learning and power. It shows how these shifts impact knowledge access, culture, who controls information. Even looking at languages like classical Chinese, revered but not used day to day, gives some perspective.
And even with tech solutions, they aren't perfect.
Right. Contemporary examples show tech can sometimes irritate people, even if it's efficient. And there's the subtle issue of lateral colonization, dominant cultural values spreading alongside a language or technology.
So maybe the future isn't one dominant language replacing another, but something more balanced.
That seems to be the direction the source points towards. More equitable interaction, maybe multiple languages used side by side, what it calls language friendliness.
And attitudes towards language are key.
Absolutely. It's tied to identity, status, politics. People want two-way communication, not just imposition. And even if English weren't the global connector, other languages can be used creatively. Tech can help bridge gaps, facilitate translation.
Plus, learning other languages is good for the brain, right?
Exactly. The cognitive benefits of bilingualism are well documented. If one dominant language fades, maybe more people will become multilingual, which could actually be a net positive in some ways.
Finally, how do people generally feel about English around the world?
It's complicated. Public attitudes are shaped by lots of things: identity, status, politics, money, culture. English is often seen in two ways: as a useful skill, a key to opportunity,
But also,
but also potentially as a threat to local languages and heritage. There's no single view. When people talk about a lingua franca, many automatically think English. But the source suggests a world without it would still find ways to communicate globally, just differently. Adaptation, diversification would look different. The person-to-person connection remains vital.
so we've circled back to that initial question. What if English disappeared tomorrow? And wow, diving into this source material, it's clear the consequences would be huge, touching almost everything.
Absolutely. Business chaos, science setbacks, travel nightmares, cultural shifts, diplomatic tangles, other languages rising, the complex role of tech, and those really deep impacts on identity.
And so, the learner thinking about all that, what does imagining English gone tell us about its current power? Its invisible influence on nearly everything we take for granted. It makes you wonder, what other stable parts of our world have that kind of deep hidden impact if they were suddenly gone?
Definitely something to reflect on. We hope this deep dive has given you some useful perspectives and plenty to think about further.
Thanks for joining us on this exploration.